Let me digress and tell you about the connection between the Sophienburg in New Braunfels, Texas, and refugees crossing the Mediterranean between Spain and northern Africa. And all that connects to Maurice of Nassau, who I think of as a world-class politician. Following the Christian victory over Muslim Spain, the Reconquista, freedom of religion was guaranteed in return for capitulation. A capitulation treaty of Granada, dated 25th of November 1491, guaranteed the Moors religious tolerance and fair treatment in return for their surrender and capitulation. Anybody acquainted with the usual mechanics of military victory over a civilian population knows what happens when a military power overwhelms a peaceful and submissive society. During the 1840s, I observed how the victorious Americans dealt with the conquered Mexicans in Texas, New Mexico, and California. Promises of equality are never settled on paper, but take centuries to resolve, if it ever happens at all. The biggest and first losers, though, are other, much smaller ethnic groups. In the conflict between the Americans and the Mexicans, the American Indians got the first and hardest blows in the newly acquired territories. It was just like in Spain 3 centuries before. A few weeks after the capitulation treaty in November 1491, Grenada was taken over by the Spanish forces. Next March, the smallest minority group, the Jews, were hit with the Alhambra decree, which began the expulsion of Jews from the kingdom. One can cover anything under the cloak of ideology and politics. The real reason was, of course, they owned the most money, wealth, and valuable real estate in the cities. Expropriating and expelling them was just step 1. A few years later, the Christian winners implemented step 2. Muslims owned the rest of the lands and buildings, and that is what the winners wanted. Treaty and law prohibited any expropriation of Muslim property. Thus, the Christian Church demanded of the Muslims to convert, first softly, then harder. If they did not convert, they had to leave. Moriscos was the term used for former Muslims who converted or were coerced into converting to Christianity. However, the religious leaders found a solution called Uran Fatwa. The religious ruling of 1504 allows the violation of any and all Muslim laws if a person's survival depends on it. Thus, many Muslims became outward Christians but remained Muslims in their heart. They could even spite Muhammad, eat pork and drink wine, participate in Christian church services, as long as they adhered to Islam in their soul. Survival of the body and family is more important than external religious paraphernalia and rituals. Clever, but the Christians still wanted their land and property. So they devised a new strategy. Change will either come from the top or be forced from the bottom. It happened in Greece and Rome, in England with Cromwell, in France, Italy, America, and elsewhere. One side will stumble and the other rise and destroy. Thousands of deaths, widows and orphans, and uncounted refugees are the result. Most people will lose. A few insiders will reap gigantic profits. When will people ever learn? Let's look at Valencia in Spain. The city and region of Valencia had been a social hotspot for a long time. Rich and prosperous for centuries, it suffered from an economic decline since the discovery of the Americas as power relocated to Atlantic harbor towns like Seville and Cadiz. Valencia's economy was being split between the landed nobles, who controlled agriculture and their cheap Morisco workers, and the city corporations, which controlled manufacturing and trade. The good old days of Fernando and Isabella were long gone. Since the Queen's death in 1504, Fernando had become a tired old man. Corruption ran rampant. Useless wars had drained the treasury. Taxation drained the cities and estates. Foreign forces, terrorists, pirates kept attacking the coasts. Finally, the aging King Fernando granted local militias and permitted private citizens to defend themselves against anybody. Inescapably, a weak government, corruption, lack of justice, and free gun laws gradually broke down law and order in Spain. Fernando died in 1516 and was succeeded by his mentally unstable daughter, Juana, whose husband Felipe had died long ago. Juana and her oldest son Carlos became co-regents a year later. It was a shaky throne at first. The 17-year-old king also inherited the thrones of Austria, the southern half of the Italian peninsula, the Netherlands, and Burgundy. When Carlos came to Spain, his prime minister sold state offices to his cronies and the highest bidder. More than ever before, corruption eroded loyalty and order. When Carlos' grandfather died, Emperor Maximilian, the young man vied for that crown as well. There were other, better, more experienced candidates for that position, but Carlos got the crown after having paid hefty bribes to the electors. Forget democracy. A small group of people called electors decide each election. Carlos continued the previous Spanish politics of corruption, cronyism, and letting regional militia fend for themselves against any perceived threats. He rushed to accept the crown, but also to confront a unique religious movement that, in itself, had dared to fight his and church corruption. Frederick the Wise and his brother John the Steadfast, the Dukes of Saxony, supported their dean of the law school of the University of Wittenberg, a Dr. Martin Luther, against the Pope and Emperor. While Carlos was in Germany, the Spanish homeland broke down. The economy had declined and shifted anyhow, as I said before. But the collapse commenced when the plague hit Valencia. When many people and leaders died, people panicked and blamed any group they could grasp as a scapegoat. Homosexuals, Moriscos, remaining Muslims, and the like. The government was overthrown by special interest groups, and a Republican government was established in Valencia, limiting privileges only to insiders. The remaining Muslims were given a choice between Christianity or death. Open civil war broke out, and eventually the Republicans defeated, punished, and executed their remaining opponents. A new group of leadership was established, yearning for ever more power and property. The most powerful among them was the Duke of Lerma. Don Francisco Gomez de Sandoval had become a childhood buddy of the future King Felipe III. Once on the throne, the young king made him Duke of Lerma, gave him unlimited powers, and thus allowed him to amass a gigantic fortune. He exhausted Spain in costly hostilities with England until total financial exhaustion forced a peace. In 1607, the government declared itself bankrupt. The crown urgently needed money, lots of money, and quickly. So, where do you go when you need money? Of course, to those who still have some. The problem was that the Jews had already been expelled a century before. The state treasury was empty, the military was antiquated, and not useful to conquer new lands. For immediate steps, King Philip III's Secretary of Finance, the Duke of Lerma, devalued the currency, imposed high import duties on luxury items from abroad, and used glitter instead of substance wherever possible. To raise funds, Lerma used one of the oldest political tricks in the world. Having nothing to gain from the poor Spanish and getting powerful resistance from the rich, he remembered the hard-working middle class, or Moriscos, that is, the former Muslims who had become Christians. He spread the rumor that they could not be trusted, whether Christian or secret Muslims. They were stigmatized for their darker hair and skin color. Lerma accused the Moriscos of collaboration with the enemy, that is, with the Muslims of northern Africa. One can get any population and politician convinced that an unwanted group is collaborating with the enemy just by repeating it often enough. In the absence of proof, the doubt alone is the instrument toward success. And if that is not enough, then one fabricates proof with fake news. It is an old concept and routinely reapplied with new terminology and technology. So how did Lerma do it without the new technology we have today, books and newspapers? With the help of divine inspiration, of course. That always works as a last resort. The Archbishop of Valencia, Juan de Ribera, became the spearhead for the great coup. If King Felipe III simply declared Muslims to be heretics and traitors to the Christian faith, he could confiscate the assets and properties of the Morisco population. It could all happen with the blessing of the Church. The expulsion of the Moriscos, Expulsión de los Moriscos, was decreed by King Felipe III on the 9th of April 1609. He signed anything put in front of him to stay in power. He even signed a 12-year truce with the rebels in the Netherlands to cut military spending. Moriscos were subject to systematic expulsion, their property confiscated. Some 300,000 Moriscos were forcibly deported to northern Africa. After being force-walked to collection points, children under 7 years of age were taken away and kept by the Spanish as servants and slaves. For this feat, the Archbishop was eventually declared a saint of the Church, and Lerma became even richer. It took the king 9 years to wisen up and fire him. And what does that have to do with Texas? Well, Lerma's granddaughter Isabel married a Spanish aristocrat, the 4th Duke of Osuna. Their line descended until the 12th Duke of Osuna. Why did I mention him? He, the 12th, in turn married in my Wiesbaden on the Rhine in the year 1866 the 24-year-old Dona Eleonora, Prince Karl zu Solms-Braunfels' stepdaughter by his wife Sophie, from her first marriage to Saum. In his letters and diaries while in Texas, he refers to her as Ellichen, Little Ellie. Solms-Braunfels named a wooden shack on a Texas hill after her mother, the Sophienburg. How is that for immortality in Texas and a connection to Spain? Back to Spain. Lerma had economically destroyed the region of Valencia for many generations to come. To escape slaughter and losing their children, many Moriscos escaped with at least some of their movable property and their young children. Utter despair is always ideal for human traffickers, scam artists, and thieves. Walls, moats, fences don't stop people, but they multiply the price to circumvent them. In the absence of common political sense, only the rich and criminals overcome them easily. For others, it just takes a little longer. In this case, in Spain, organized human traffickers from France offered boats to carry the refugees from Spain to Morocco. Once aboard, the French stole their belongings and, if there was any resistance, killed them. Many were taken elsewhere and held for ransom or sold as slaves.
And more euros for to save their children.
Only the lucky ones reached the Moroccan shore. With their last strength they complained to the Moroccan ruler. And so, in 1610 and 11, Zidan Abu Mali sent 3 ambassadors to France in order to claim damages on behalf of the Moriscos. Hard to believe, but they actually obtained some compensation. The ambassadors also went to Prince Maurice in the Netherlands to get help for liberating kidnapped and stranded Moriscos. Maurice, in turn, used the opportunity to form an alliance with the ruler of Morocco against Spain for the time when the truce would end. The war for independence from Spain was far from over. Well, now let's get back to Maurice and America.